The phone rang at exactly 8:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had just finished her morning coffee when her boss called with what he described as a special assignment. She worked for a consulting company that helped big corporations understand their employees better most of the time. Her job was pretty straightforward: go to offices, watch how people work, and write reports about what she saw. But this assignment was different. Her boss explained that HFY Solutions, a software company downtown, had one particular employee who was causing some concern among the higher-ups. This person was incredibly talented and got amazing results, but their way of working was completely unconventional. The company executives weren't sure if they should promote this person or find ways to make them fit in better with everyone else. "We need you to go in there and observe," her boss said. "Don't let anyone know you're specifically watching one person. Just tell them you're doing a general workplace study. We need to know if this employee is leadership material or if they're too much of a wild card." Lisa had done dozens of these assessments before, but something about this one felt unusual. Usually, companies were worried about employees who weren't performing well. This time, they were concerned about someone who was performing too well, but in their own unique way. The next Monday morning, Lisa arrived at HFY Solutions carrying her laptop bag and a stack of official-looking documents. The HR manager, a friendly woman in her 40s, showed her around the office and set her up in a small conference room with glass walls that overlooked the main work floor. "We're so excited to have you here," the HR manager said. "We're always looking for ways to improve our workplace culture. Your study will be really helpful for understanding how our teams work together." Lisa smiled and nodded, feeling a tiny bit guilty about not revealing the real reason for her visit. She opened her laptop and pulled out her observation sheets, setting up her workspace so she could watch the employees without being too obvious about it. The office was modern and open, with developers sitting at desks arranged in small clusters. Most people seemed focused on their computer screens, typing away or having quiet conversations about code and projects. It looked like a typical tech company: lots of young professionals, casual dress code, and the constant hum of productivity. But then she noticed in the far corner of the office, one developer stood out immediately. While everyone else sat at their desks working quietly, this person was standing at a whiteboard, drawing diagrams and talking animatedly to two colleagues. He used his hands a lot when he spoke, and even from across the room, Lisa could see that his explanations were more like storytelling than typical technical discussions. His workspace was completely different from everyone else's too. Instead of the clean, organized desks that surrounded him, his area looked like a creative chaos. There were sticky notes everywhere, hand-drawn sketches pinned to a bulletin board, and what appeared to be small toys or gadgets scattered around his monitor. Despite the mess, he seemed to know exactly where everything was. Over the next few hours, Lisa watched his patterns. He didn't follow the same schedule as his co-workers. While most people arrived by 9 a.m. and worked steadily until lunch, he showed up around 10:30 and immediately dove into intense work sessions. He would focus completely for 2 or 3 hours, then suddenly get up and walk around the office, chatting with different team members. What surprised Lisa was how people reacted to him. Instead of being annoyed by his interruptions, his colleagues seemed genuinely happy to see him. They would stop their own work to listen to his ideas or ask for his opinion on problems they were stuck on. There was something magnetic about his energy that drew people in. During her lunch break, Lisa decided to grab a sandwich from the office kitchen. As she was waiting for her food to heat up in the microwave, the developer she'd been watching walked in, up close. She could see he was probably in his early 30s, with an easy smile and eyes that seemed to be constantly thinking. "You're the researcher, right?" he said, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a homemade lunch. "I notice you've been watching our team pretty closely today." Lisa felt her cheeks warm slightly. She thought she'd been subtle with her observations. "I'm conducting a workplace culture study," she said, sticking to her cover story. just trying to understand how different teams collaborate and communicate. He nodded thoughtfully while unwrapping his sandwich. That's fascinating work. I've always been curious about workplace psychology myself. What have you noticed so far about our little corner of chaos over there? The question caught Lisa off guard. Most employees either ignored researchers completely or gave cautious, politically correct answers when asked about their workplace. This person seemed genuinely interested in her perspective and wasn't afraid to acknowledge that his team might look chaotic to an outside observer. Well, Lisa said carefully, every workplace has its own rhythm. I'm still learning about yours. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. Diplomatic answer. You must be good at your job. He paused, taking a bite of his sandwich. You know, if you really want to understand how we work, you should stick around after hours sometime. That's when the real magic happens. We do our best problem solving when the office gets quiet and we can really focus. As he walked back to his desk, Lisa found herself thinking about his suggestion. In all her years of workplace observation, she'd never had an employee so directly acknowledge what she was doing or invite her to see more of their work process. Most people tried to act extra professional when they knew they were being studied. The afternoon brought more interesting observations. Around 3 p.m., when most of the office hit that post-lunch energy slump, the developer she'd been watching seemed to come alive. He pulled his team into an impromptu brainstorming session, and Lisa watched as they tackled a complex problem with an approach she'd never seen before. Instead of sitting around a conference table with laptops and official presentations, they stood around his whiteboard while he drew pictures and diagrams. He asked questions that seemed to come from completely different angles, pushing his teammates to think beyond their usual approaches. Within an hour, they'd come up with 3 potential solutions to a problem that had been frustrating them for days. As 5 p.m. approached and most employees started packing up to go home, Lisa noticed that her subject showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, he seemed more energized as the office emptied out. She remembered his comment about the real work happening after hours and decided to stay a bit later to see what he meant. By 6 p.m., the office was nearly empty except for a few dedicated workers scattered around the floor. Lisa watched as the developer's whole demeanor shifted. With fewer distractions and interruptions, he settled into what could only be described as a state of flow. His fingers flew across the keyboard, and occasionally he would lean back in his chair, stare at the ceiling for a moment, then dive back into his work with renewed intensity. What struck Lisa most was how natural and unforced it all seemed. This wasn't someone trying to show off or prove a point. This was simply how he worked best. The unconventional schedule, the creative workspace, the collaborative approach, it all served a purpose in helping him produce exceptional results. As she packed up her own things to leave, Lisa realized that her first day of observation had already challenged her initial assumptions. She'd expected to find someone who was difficult to work with or who ignored company policies. Instead, she'd discovered someone who had found a way to maximize both his own potential and his team's effectiveness, even if his methods didn't fit the traditional corporate mold. Walking to her car, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment was going to be more complicated than she'd anticipated. Usually, her recommendations were straightforward. Either someone was a good fit for leadership, or they weren't. But this situation felt different. The question wasn't whether this person was capable of leading others. The question was whether the company was flexible enough to embrace a leadership style that didn't fit their conventional expectations. As she drove home, Lisa found herself looking forward to tomorrow's observations in a way that surprised her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was studying someone who might teach her something new about what effective leadership could look like in the modern workplace. By the end of her first week at HFY Solutions, Lisa had filled 3 notebooks with observations. What she discovered was completely different from what she'd expected. When she first received this assignment, the developer she was studying wasn't chaotic or difficult to manage. Instead, he had created his own system that actually worked better than the traditional approaches used by everyone else. Every morning, Lisa would arrive at the office and set up her laptop in the glass conference room. She'd learned that he typically arrived around 10:30, not because he was lazy or undisciplined, but because he discovered that his team was most productive during certain hours of the day, while other managers scheduled meetings randomly throughout the day. He had studied his teammates' energy patterns and planned collaborative work. When everyone was naturally at their peak, on Tuesday of her second week, Lisa watched him handle a crisis that would have stressed most people to their breaking point. A major client had called with an urgent problem that threatened to derail a project worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. While the account managers were panicking and sending frantic emails, he calmly gathered his team around the whiteboard. "Okay, here's what we know," he said, drawing a simple diagram. "The client's system is crashing every time they try to process more than 1,000 transactions at once. We build it to handle 10 times that amount, so something else is going on." Instead of immediately diving into technical solutions, he asked his team questions that seemed almost philosophical. What assumptions did we make when we built this? What would happen if those assumptions were wrong? What are we not seeing? Lisa watched as his team members relaxed and started thinking creatively instead of defensively. Within 2 hours, they'd identified the real problem and developed a solution that was actually better than what they'd originally built. The client was thrilled, and what could have been a disaster turned into an opportunity to strengthen their relationship. After the crisis was resolved, Lisa couldn't help but compare his approach to what she'd seen at other companies. Most managers would have assigned blame, worked overtime to patch the immediate problem, and moved on. This person had used the crisis as a learning opportunity that made the entire system stronger. That afternoon, Lisa decided to take a closer look at the project files he'd been working on. With permission from HR, she reviewed some of his recent presentations and proposals. What she found amazed her. His ideas weren't just creative, they were revolutionary. He'd identified problems that other people hadn't even noticed and developed solutions that could change how the entire industry approached similar challenges. But what impressed Lisa most was how he presented these ideas. Instead of using complex technical jargon that only experts could understand, he explained everything through stories and analogies that made sense to anyone. In one presentation about data security, he compared digital protection to designing a house. He explained firewalls like locks on doors, encryption like safe deposit boxes, and backup systems like insurance policies. The more Lisa studied his work, the more she realized that his unconventional methods weren't random or undisciplined. They were carefully thought out strategies based on a deep understanding of how people learn, collaborate, and solve problems together. On Wednesday, Lisa decided to stay late again to observe his after-hours work patterns. Around 7 p.m., when the office was nearly empty, she noticed him working with Jake, a junior developer who had been struggling with a particularly difficult project. Most senior employees would have either done the work themselves or given basic instructions and walked away. Instead, he sat beside Jake and guided him through the problem-solving process step by step. "Don't worry about getting it perfect right away," he told Jake. "Let's just try something and see what happens. We can always adjust it later." Lisa watched as Jake's confidence grew throughout their session. Instead of feeling stupid or incompetent, the younger developer began asking questions and suggesting ideas. By the end of the evening, Jake had not only solved his immediate problem, but had learned skills that would help him tackle similar challenges in the future. This wasn't the first time Lisa had observed this kind of mentoring. Throughout the week, she'd seen him helping different team members in ways that went far beyond his official job responsibilities. He never made people feel like they were bothering him or taking up his valuable time. Instead, he seemed to genuinely enjoy helping others grow and succeed. On Thursday morning, Lisa was reviewing her notes when the HR manager stopped by her conference room. "How's the study going?" she asked. "I hope our teams are giving you good insights into our culture." Lisa smiled diplomatically. "Everyone's been very welcoming. I'm learning a lot about how different people approach their work." The HR manager nodded. "If you have any specific questions, feel free to ask. We're really hoping your recommendations will help us improve our management structure. We have some employees who are incredibly talented, but don't quite fit the traditional leadership mold." After the HR manager left, Lisa realized that the company executives weren't just evaluating one person's potential for promotion. They were questioning whether their entire approach to leadership needed to change. The developer she'd been observing represented a different way of thinking about what it meant to guide and inspire a team. That afternoon, Lisa witnessed something that crystallized everything she'd been observing. The company's biggest client was visiting for a quarterly review meeting, and all the department heads were presenting their progress reports. Most of the presentations followed the same format: lots of charts, technical details, and formal business language that probably impressed executives, but didn't really connect with people. When it was his turn to present, everything changed. Instead of standing behind a podium with slides, he sat at the conference table and started telling a story about the challenges they'd faced and how they'd overcome them. He talked about the client's goals as if they were his own personal mission. He explained complex technical achievements in terms that everyone could understand and appreciate. But what really stood out to Lisa was how he included his team in the presentation. Instead of taking all the credit for their successes, he highlighted specific contributions from different team members and explained how their unique skills had made the project possible. The client was visibly impressed, not just with the results, but with the obvious dedication and collaboration of the entire team. After the meeting, Lisa overheard several executives discussing the presentation. Some were clearly impressed by his results and leadership style. Others seemed concerned that his approach was too informal or unconventional for a senior management role. That evening, as Lisa drove home, she found herself thinking about leadership in ways she never had before. Throughout her career, she'd evaluated hundreds of managers and potential leaders. Most of them followed predictable patterns and used established methods that looked good on paper, but didn't always translate to real-world success. This person was different. His leadership wasn't based on authority or position. It was based on trust, understanding, and a genuine desire to help others succeed. His team followed him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They trusted his judgment because he'd proven that he cared about their growth and success as much as he cared about the company's bottom line. As she pulled into her driveway, Lisa realized that her feelings about this assignment were becoming complicated. She'd started this study expecting to write a straightforward assessment about whether someone was ready for promotion. Instead, she was discovering new ideas about what effective leadership could look like. More concerning was the fact that she was starting to admire not just his professional skills, but his character and values as a person. For the first time in her consulting career, Lisa wondered if she was becoming too personally invested in the outcome of her evaluation. Professional objectivity had always been her strength, but something about this situation was different. She was no longer just observing a subject for analysis. She was learning from someone who was challenging her assumptions about work, leadership, and what it meant to build something meaningful with other people. Lisa's third week at HFY Solutions started with a problem she'd never faced in her 10 years. As a workplace consultant, she sat in her car in the parking lot Monday morning, staring at the building and wondering if she could still do her job objectively. Over the weekend, she'd realized that her professional assessment was becoming tangled with personal feelings she hadn't expected. Every report she'd written so far painted an overwhelmingly positive picture of the developer she was studying. His leadership skills were exceptional, his team respected him, and his results spoke for themselves. But Lisa couldn't shake the worry that her growing admiration for him as a person was influencing her professional judgment. She'd spent Sunday night reviewing all her notes, looking for any signs of bias in her observations. Was she focusing too much on his successes and ignoring potential weaknesses? Was she being fair to the company that had hired her to provide an honest assessment? These questions kept her awake until nearly 2 a.m., and now she felt exhausted before Her workday had even begun. Walking into the office, Lisa decided to approach this week differently. She would deliberately look for flaws and challenges in his leadership style. Every manager had weaknesses, and part of her job was to identify areas for improvement. Maybe focusing on potential problems would help her regain the professional distance she needed, but her plan to find fault with his work style hit an immediate obstacle. On Monday afternoon, Lisa witnessed him handling a situation that would have destroyed most managers' reputations. Amy, one of the junior developers on his team, had made a coding error that corrupted an important database. The mistake had cost the company several hours of downtime and potentially thousands of dollars in lost productivity. Lisa watched from her conference room as Amy sat at her desk, clearly devastated by what had happened. Other managers in similar situations would have called her into their office for a disciplinary meeting or at least documented the incident for her personnel file. Instead, he pulled up a chair beside Amy's desk and spoke with her quietly for about 10 minutes. Later, Lisa learned what he told Amy during that conversation. Instead of focusing on the mistake, he talked about how errors like this were part of the learning process. For every developer, he shared a story about a similar mistake he made early in his own career and how it had taught him to build better safety systems. Then he worked with Amy to understand what had gone wrong and how to prevent similar problems in the future. By the end of the day, Amy wasn't just recovered from her mistake. She was actually more confident than before. She'd learned valuable lessons about database management and had been reassured that making mistakes while learning was not only acceptable but expected. Lisa had never seen a manager turn a potentially damaging situation into a positive learning experience so effectively. Tuesday brought another challenge to Lisa's attempt to find professional flaws. The company announced that all departments needed to cut their budgets by 15% due to unexpected market pressures. While other department heads were panicking about which projects to cancel or which staff members to let go, he approached the problem creatively. Instead of making unilateral decisions about cuts, he gathered his team together and explained the situation honestly. We need to reduce our spending, but I don't want to sacrifice the quality of our work or anyone's job security, he told them. Let's brainstorm ways to work more efficiently without compromising what we're trying to achieve. What followed was the most productive team meeting Lisa had ever observed. Team members suggested everything from renegotiating software licenses to combining similar projects to reduce duplication. Within 2 hours, they'd identified ways to cut costs by nearly 20%, while actually improving their workflow processes. Other department heads were making painful cuts that hurt morale and productivity. This team had turned a budget crisis into an opportunity to become more efficient and collaborative. Lisa found herself taking notes not just for her assessment, but because she wanted to remember these techniques for future consulting projects. Wednesday afternoon brought the moment Lisa had been both anticipating and dreading. The developer approached her during her lunch break, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the office kitchen. Mind if I join you? He asked, setting 1 cup in front of her. I've been wanting to ask you about your research. What patterns are you seeing in our workplace culture? Lisa accepted the coffee gratefully, but her stomach tightened with nervousness. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd had several brief conversations, but this felt different, more intentional. Every workplace has its own personality, she said. Carefully, I'm still analyzing the data I've collected. He nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about our conversations, and I realize I don't even know your name. I've just been thinking of you as the researcher who actually pays attention to what people do, instead of just what they say they do. Lisa laughed despite her nervousness. I'm Lisa. And you're right, I do prefer observing actual behavior over self-reported surveys. I'm David, he said, extending his hand for a formal introduction. And I have to admit, I'm curious about your background. Most corporate consultants I've met focus on policies and procedures. You seem more interested in understanding people. The conversation that followed was unlike any Lisa had experienced during a professional assignment. David asked thoughtful questions about workplace psychology, and seemed genuinely interested in her perspective on team dynamics. He shared his own observations about what motivated different personality types and how he'd learned to adapt his communication style to help each team member succeed. As they talked, Lisa realized that David had been studying his workplace just as carefully as she had. But from the inside, his unconventional management style wasn't based on instinct or luck. It was the result of years of observing what actually worked to inspire and motivate people, rather than what management textbooks said should work. "I have a confession," David said as their conversation wound down. "I've known from day one that you're here to evaluate me specifically. The timing of your arrival, combined with the fact that I've been told I'm being considered for the department head position, made it pretty obvious." Lisa felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I'm sorry about the deception. I was told to keep the specific focus of my study confidential." David waved away her concern. "Don't apologize. I understand why companies do these assessments. What I'm curious about is whether you found what you were looking for." The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Lisa wasn't sure she was ready to address. Had she found what she was looking for? Professionally, yes. David was clearly ready for increased leadership responsibilities. But personally, she'd found something she hadn't been looking for at all. "Your approach to leadership is definitely unconventional," Lisa said finally. "But your results speak for themselves." David smiled. "That's a very diplomatic answer. You'd be good at politics." As they walked back to their respective work areas, Lisa felt a shift in their dynamic. The formal barrier between researcher and subject had dissolved, replaced by something that felt more like mutual respect and genuine interest. For the first time since arriving at HFY, Lisa felt like she was talking to David as a person, rather than studying him as a case study. That evening, as Lisa reviewed her notes from the day, she realized that her professional objectivity wasn't just compromised, it was completely gone. She was no longer evaluating David's suitability for promotion. She was admiring his integrity, his intelligence, and his genuine care for the people around him. The assessment that was supposed to be about his qualifications had become something entirely different. Lisa was beginning to understand that her feelings weren't just about professional respect. She was developing a personal interest in David that went far beyond the scope of her consulting assignment. As she packed up her laptop to go home, Lisa knew she was facing a decision that would affect both her professional reputation and her personal integrity. She could try to push her feelings aside and complete her assignment as planned, or she could acknowledge that this situation had become too complicated for simple professional boundaries. Either way, she knew that her final report would be the most challenging document she'd ever written, not because David was difficult to assess, but because her own feelings had become part of the equation in ways she'd never experienced before. Lisa's fourth week at HFY Solutions began with an email that made her stomach drop. Her supervisor, Mr. Thompson, wanted to schedule a video call to discuss her preliminary findings. The deadline for her final assessment was approaching, and the company executives were eager to make their promotion decision. Sitting in her hotel room that evening, Lisa stared at her laptop screen as Mr. Thompson's face appeared in the video call window. Behind him, she could see the sterile corporate office where she'd started this assignment a month ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. "So, Lisa, how's our special project going?" Mr. Thompson asked, leaning back in his chair. "I trust you've gathered enough information to make a solid recommendation about this David character." Lisa had prepared for this conversation, but hearing David referred to as this David character made her uncomfortable in a way she hadn't expected. "My assessment is nearly complete," she said carefully. "David demonstrates exceptional leadership qualities and has achieved outstanding results with his team." Mr. Thompson's expression shifted slightly. "Exceptional leadership qualities? That's interesting. I've been hearing some different perspectives from the executives at HFY. Apparently, there are concerns about his unconventional methods and whether he fit into their senior management structure." "What kind of concerns?" Lisa asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. "Well, There's talk that he doesn't follow standard procedures, that his approach to team management is too informal, and that he might not be the right cultural fit for a department head position. Mr. Thompson paused, studying Lisa's reaction. Between you and me, I think the executives are looking for reasons to promote someone else, someone more traditional and predictable. Lisa felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. Sir, with respect, my observations show that David's methods are actually more effective than traditional approaches. His team has the highest productivity rates in the company, the lowest turnover, and consistently exceeds their project goals. I understand that, Mr. Thompson said, his tone becoming more pointed. But sometimes what's effective and what's politically wise are two different things. Companies don't always want the most capable person in leadership roles. Sometimes they want the person who will cause the least disruption to existing power structures. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but Lisa barely heard the rest of it. She realized that her assessment wasn't just about evaluating David's qualifications. It was about whether she would recommend him, knowing that certain executives preferred a different outcome, regardless of his capabilities. After the call ended, Lisa sat in her hotel room feeling like she was facing the biggest professional challenge of her career. She built her reputation on providing honest, objective assessments based on careful observation. Now she was being subtly pressured to consider political factors that had nothing to do with David's actual qualifications for the position. The next morning, Lisa arrived at the office feeling conflicted and distracted. She tried to focus on her final observations, but her mind kept returning to the conversation with Mr. Thompson. As she watched David work with his team, she found herself imagining how different the department would be under more traditional management. Around lunchtime, David appeared at her conference room door holding the sandwiches from the deli across the street. Thought you might be hungry, he said, setting one sandwich on her table. You seemed a bit distracted today. Everything okay with your research? Lisa looked up at him, and for a moment, she almost told him everything about the real purpose of her assignment, about the pressure she was feeling from her supervisor, about how her professional objectivity had been completely compromised by her growing feelings for him. Instead, she just smiled and thanked him for the sandwich. Actually, David said, sitting down across from her, I wanted to talk to you about something. I know you're probably finishing up your studies soon, and I wanted you to know how much I've enjoyed our conversations. It's rare to meet someone who thinks about workplace dynamics as thoughtfully as you do. Lisa felt her heart start beating faster. The way David was looking at her suggested that their connection wasn't one-sided. But the timing couldn't have been worse. I've enjoyed talking with you too, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Your perspective on leadership has been really insightful. David leaned forward slightly. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime, not as researcher and subject, but as to people who seem to have a lot in common. The invitation hung in the air between them, and Lisa felt like she was standing at a crossroads. Everything about David's character and integrity had impressed her over the past month. His kindness, his intelligence, his genuine care for the people around him, all of it had drawn her in ways she hadn't expected. But accepting his invitation would cross a line that could destroy her professional reputation and compromise her ability to complete her assignment objectively. Even worse, she still hadn't told him the truth about why she was really at HFY. David, she said carefully, there's something I need to tell you about my work here. My assignment isn't just a general workplace culture study. I was specifically hired to evaluate you for the department head position. David's expression didn't change as much as Lisa had expected. He nodded slowly, as if he was processing information he'd already suspected. I figured it was something like that. He said finally, the timing was too coincidental, and you've been watching my team more closely than anyone else's. He paused, studying her face. The question is, how do you feel about that assignment now? Lisa felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I feel like I've completely lost my professional objectivity. I started this job planning to write a straightforward assessment, and instead I've gotten to know someone who challenges everything. I thought I knew about effective leadership, and personally, David asked quietly. Lisa met his eyes directly. Personally, I think you're one of the most impressive people I've ever met, which is exactly why I can't have dinner with you while I'm still working on this assessment. David nodded, looking disappointed but understanding. I respect that. Professional integrity is important to you, just like it is to me. That afternoon, Lisa learned through office gossip that the promotion decision timeline had been moved up. The executives wanted her final report by the end of the week, which meant she had only 3 days to complete her assessment and make her recommendation. But the gossip also revealed something else that made Lisa's situation even more complicated. According to the office rumors, the leading candidate for the department head position wasn't David at all. It was Robert Chen, a manager from another division who had strong connections with several senior executives. Lisa realized that her assessment might not even matter. The political machinery might already be in motion to promote someone based on relationships rather than qualifications. The thought made her angry, but it also clarified her decision about what to write in her report. That evening, Lisa sat in her hotel room and began writing the most important document of her professional career. She wrote about David's exceptional problem-solving abilities, his talent for inspiring and developing his team members, and his consistent track record of exceeding goals while maintaining high morale. But she also wrote something else, a separate memo requesting to be removed from the assignment due to a conflict of interest. She couldn't continue pretending to be objective when her personal feelings were so clearly involved. As she finished typing, Lisa realized that her decision to be honest about her compromised objectivity might actually help David more than trying to hide her feelings and write a report that appeared neutral. Her recommendation would carry more weight precisely because she was acknowledging the personal cost of making it. The next morning, Lisa submitted both documents to her supervisor and requested an immediate meeting to discuss the situation. She knew that her decision to disclose her conflict of interest might damage her reputation as a consultant, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. Whatever happened next, Lisa was determined that her final act on this assignment would be to ensure that David received the honest, thorough evaluation he deserved, even if it meant admitting that she was no longer the right person to provide it. The video call with Mr. Thompson didn't go as badly as Lisa had expected. When she explained her conflict of interest and request to be removed from the assignment, her supervisor was surprisingly understanding. Lisa, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never had a consultant asked to be removed from a project because they were too impressed with the subject, Mr. Thompson said with a slight smile. That actually tells me more about this David's character than any formal assessment could. Lisa felt relief wash over her. So you'll accept my recommendation and assign someone else to complete the evaluation? Actually, no, Mr. Thompson said, leaning forward in his chair. Your assessment is already complete, and it's exactly what we needed. Your personal feelings don't invalidate your professional observations. If anything, they confirm them. Someone who can earn that level of respect from a trained workplace analyst in just 1 month is clearly exceptional. 3 days later, Lisa received a call from HFY's HR department. David had been promoted to department head, effective immediately. The decision had been unanimous among the senior executives once they read Lisa's detailed assessment and recommendation. But the call also brought unexpected news. HFY was so impressed with Lisa's insights about workplace culture and team dynamics that they wanted to offer her a permanent position as their director of employee development. The role would involve designing programs to help other managers learn the leadership techniques that made David so effective. Lisa sat in her hotel room, staring at the job offer email that had just arrived in her inbox. For 10 years, she'd traveled from company to company, studying workplaces and writing reports that usually ended up filed away and forgotten. This opportunity would let her actually implement positive changes, instead of just documenting problems. But accepting the position would mean staying in the same city as David. After everything that had happened during her assignment, she wasn't sure if working at the same company was wise, even in a different department. That evening, Lisa made a decision that surprised even herself. She drove to TechFlow's office building and used her temporary access card to get inside. She found David in his usual spot, working late in the now quiet office. "Congratulations on the promotion," she said, approaching his desk. "I heard the news this afternoon." David looked up from his computer, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Thank you. I also heard that TechFlow offered you a permanent position. That's amazing." Lisa sat down in the chair beside his desk, the same spot where she'd observed so many of his mentoring sessions with other employees. "I'm not sure if I should accept it." "Why not?" David asked, turning away from his computer to give her his full attention. "Because I'm worried about working at the same company as someone I have feelings for," Lisa said, deciding that honesty had worked so well during her assessment that she might as well continue with it. David was quiet for a moment, and Lisa wondered if she'd made a mistake by being so direct. Then he smiled, and she felt her heart start beating faster. "You know," David said, "I've been thinking a lot about our situation. You were absolutely right to maintain professional boundaries during your assignment, but that assignment is over. Now, you're no longer evaluating me, and I'm no longer the subject of your study." Lisa nodded, but she still felt uncertain. "It's not that simple, though. If we work at the same company and start dating, people will assume that my assessment was influenced by personal feelings." "Maybe," David said, "but your assessment was based on weeks of careful observation and documentation. Anyone who reads your report can see that it's thorough and professional. Besides, the people whose opinions matter most already know your character and integrity." Over the next hour, they talked about everything that had happened during Lisa's month at TechFlow. David shared that he'd known from the beginning that he was being evaluated, but he'd chosen to be completely authentic rather than try to impress anyone. Lisa explained how her professional objectivity had been challenged by discovering someone who embodied everything she believed effective leadership should be. "I have a confession," David said as their conversation wound down. "That first day, when I brought you coffee and asked about your research, I wasn't just being friendly. I was already interested in getting to know you better." Lisa laughed. "And I was trying so hard to maintain professional distance while secretly admiring everything about how you worked with your team. So what do we do now?" David asked. Lisa looked around the office where she'd spent the past month discovering not just David's exceptional leadership abilities, but also her own capacity for feelings she hadn't expected. The job offer from TechFlow represented everything she'd been looking for in her career. A chance to make a real difference instead of just writing reports that gathered dust. "I think," Lisa said slowly, "that I'm going to accept the position. And I think we should see what happens." When two people who respect each other's professional abilities also happen to be personally attracted to each other. David's smile was brighter than any of the office's fluorescent lights. "I was hoping you'd say that." 6 months later, Lisa was presenting her first quarterly report to TechFlow's executive team. The employee development program she'd designed was already showing impressive results. 3 other managers had successfully implemented mentoring techniques similar to David's, and overall employee satisfaction scores had increased by 30%, but the most significant change wasn't reflected in any official metrics. Lisa had found work that felt meaningful and fulfilling in ways she'd never experienced during her consulting career. Instead of observing workplace problems from the outside, she was actually solving them from within. Her relationship with David had developed naturally alongside their professional collaboration. They often worked together on leadership development initiatives, combining Lisa's understanding of workplace psychology with David's practical experience in team management. Their colleagues had quickly accepted their relationship, especially after seeing how their different expertise complemented each other. The office romance that had started as a secret assignment had become something neither of them had expected, a true partnership that enhanced both their personal and professional lives. One evening, as they walked out of the office together after a particularly successful team workshop, David asked Lisa if she ever regretted accepting The touch flow position. Never, Lisa said without hesitation. This is the first time in my career that I've felt like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. David stopped walking and turned to face her. I feel the same way about the work and about us. As they stood in the parking lot where Lisa had first arrived for her assignment 10 months earlier, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. She'd come to Touch Flow expecting to spend for weeks writing a routine assessment. Instead, she'd discovered a new career path, a deeper understanding of what made workplaces truly successful, and someone who shared her values about treating people with respect and integrity. The assignment that was supposed to evaluate whether David could lead others had ended up teaching Lisa what it meant to find both professional fulfillment and personal happiness. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you weren't looking for them at all. Looking back, Lisa realized that the best outcomes often came from situations that seemed complicated or challenging at first. Her month of secretly observing David had taught her that authentic leadership, honest communication, and genuine care for others could create something beautiful, both in the workplace and in life. As they drove home together, Lisa smiled at the thought that what had started as professional surveillance had become the foundation for everything she valued most. Sometimes the person you're sent to observe ends up being exactly the person you need to discover who you're meant to become.